June AIX Virtual User Group webinar. We got a lot to cover today and a great topic, so let's get started with a few things. First of all, our topic today, the HMC. Nearly everybody that uses power systems uses an HMC as their management tool, and there's a lot of changes going on with the HMC these days. And you know, it's evolved over the years. I remember when it first came out, actually some issues with it, and it got way better, and it's been a fantastic management tool since. Some changes happening again, and some new features, some new, I don't know, say way that we're offering the HMC, and some new changes to the interface of the HMC. All these things we're going to talk about a little bit today. So we've got several people that are going to help us with this. And let me introduce them. So we're going to start out with Bob Schuster. Bob has works with the what we call the Washington System Center, WSC, these days. Used to be ATS. Bob's worked for IBM for almost 30 years. He's worked mainly on IBM I products, but also other integration products. He's currently working on Power 8, Open Power, Linux, IBM I, and Bob does a lot with HMC. Bob sets up lots of stuff for us. So Bob's going to kick us off today. We're also going to have Alan Walsh today. Alan is also with IBM, our Washington System Center, used to be ATS. I just think of it as ATS, sorry guys. He's been in the industry for over 40 years, IBM, working on power systems for 26 years. Alan and Bob both talk at many of the conferences stuff, and he's co-authored several red books. Alan is sort of the, what I'll say, the Washington System Center HMC expert, at least that I go to a lot. We also are lucky to have today Ashok, Shamsundar Ashok. He is with the development group. He's working on power systems, worked for IBM for 17 years on power systems management. Ashok is the lead developer of the HMC, owner of the Cloud Management Council, and other things, and a great asset to have with us to talk today. I always like to get input from the development side of the house. They have some deep insight, and it's great to tell them things too, so we can give them feedback. Also, we have Hari Muralidharan. Kind of in the background. Hari is also with development from India, and he's going to be in the background answering questions. So as we type in questions today, he's going to help with answering those. So hopefully we've got a lot to cover today, and getting the questions kind of as we go along will really help. So I really appreciate having him back there as well. So with that, you know, why don't I just hand it over to you, Bob? I see your screen is up, and you can lead us off here.
All right, thanks, Joe, and welcome everybody. Good morning, good evening, or wherever you're at around the world. I appreciate you taking your time out of your busy schedules. One of the things I'm going to cover is we are going to shortly announce a HMC based on power, actually using an open power box that we announced earlier in the year, actually late last year. And so this is the first time we're going to do that for IBM. And then I'm also going to talk about the virtual HMC running on a power box in a logical partition. I'm going to spend about 15 minutes, maybe a little bit more, going through what to expect with this, when it's going to come. But the main idea of this is, along with the new HMC that's going to be coming out in second half of the year, what you're going to find in mid-August, we're going to be shipping a new version of the HMC code that's going to have the enhanced GUI only, and that's what Alan and Ashok are really going to focus on. So let's get right to it. I'm going to leave this in non-screen show mode, and the reason is because I'm going to actually do some live demos. So we're actually going to support now the HMC based on the 8870 release, which the GA is to be determined in second half of 2017. I'll let Ashok, if he wants to give a more specific date, but right now just assume it's going to be before the end of the year. The 887 code, as I said, will be coming out in the August time frame. Couple things to keep in mind. This will be an appliance like your CR8, CR9, where it'll come pre-installed and run the full HMC like you would do the HMC today. There is a couple of other things that I want to talk about that are going to be different with the power-based HMC. Excuse me. On the right-hand side of the screen, we're going to support the virtual HMC, similar to what we do in the VMware KVM x86 environment today, except we are going to support it on a power-based box. And we'll talk a little bit about that as well. A couple things to keep in mind. There will be no Counsel on the virtual HMC, no local Counsel, no NIM install, and we will allow you, and I'll go through that, but basically you will come in, you'll run a few commands to set up the IP address and whatever, and you will use it like you would typically use an HMC today for the most part, where you would log in to the web GUI and do your normal day-to-day activities. Little bit of more information on the HMC. It's based on the what we codenamed Stratton when it came out, which would, in terms of the product itself, were based on the 8000-12C, and we're going to make a configuration unique, and we're going to lock down the configuration for simplicity, just like we did on the x86 based CR8, 9, etc. What you'll find is it's going to have 32 gig of memory. It'll have a single core, a 6-core processor. The factory image will be installed by Supermicro. That's who puts and assembles the product for us. And you'll have your normal support just like anything else, that any of the other HMCs, etc. Here's some other things for capabilities of the 8001. Notice that not every piece of hardware that's supported in that will be supported in the HMC. So I just put in a couple of next charts just to give you some illustration of it. It is a 1U server. Couple things, it will have 4 disk bays, but the disk drive right here and here will be 2 1 terabyte drive or 2 2-terabyte drives that will be RAID in manufacturing. And then in the back, we have a BMC, a baseboard management controller, that if you want to do remote management to this, which I highly recommend, you're going to set an IP address on the BMC, but it also has your local Counsel capability that you would plug into a 1U flat panel or a crash box or whatever you want to call it in your environment. It does have dual power supplies. It will have 4 external uplinks for the HMC. Potentially one is going to go to your local HMC port on the back of the ASMI or the FSP of your power box. And then you would plug in the BMC connection to your management network if you wanted to take over full Counsel capability. Because one of the things that's going to be completely unique to this, in the CR8, 9 product line, where the x86 had an IMM to do remote connectivity, we never really supported that, and a lot of our customers asked for that. In the BMC environment of the Power HMC, we're going to fully support that. So I've already gone through and set ours up and put it on the network. In this case, I've got the IP address, and I'm going to log into the box right now, and I've actually got it powered off. But the BMC and its web GUI interface, and you can also use an IPMI utility if you wanted a command line as well, and it would give you some of the screen feedback. But what I'm going to do is go ahead and say power on the box, and then I'm going to go up to my remote control capability and say Counsel redirect. And this, when I say launch the Counsel, and I've got multiple screens on my box, I'll bring it over here in a second to show you what you would get. It's going to bring up a Java viewer, very similar to what an IMM would do, and the exact same function that's built into all these open power boxes that use BMC. And it'll take a few minutes for this thing to cycle through. And while it's doing that and it's powering up, and if I go back to my screen and go back to the system, a couple things I can do here. You can see the screen here. You can see it's powered on. A Couple things I can do in this is I can mount virtual media, or I could mount virtual media from, and I got to bring all the icons over here. Let's say I wanted to go in and upgrade with another ISO, let's say after the fact or way down the road. I decided that, you know, I wanted to update my HMC, or I wanted to put on a new release when that comes out someday. I could go find the ISO image and go through, and I'm just going to go look into mine, and here's some of the code we're running. There you can see the Counsel is up and running right now. Oops. And I want to make sure I stop this. And here's some of the things you can do. All these things are in the information, and I didn't stop it fast enough. And it's actually, this is what you're going to see when the system comes to you from manufacturing. It's actually going to come up, boot, and if you don't get in there to stop the boot sequence, it'll go right into the HMC. We would want to stop that boot sequence and actually assign an IP address for the BMC, and I'll show you in a minute how you would do that from a screen. But if I come back to the virtual media, and I go back to this open file, I could go in and mount an ISO image just like, because there is no internal DVD device on here. So in this case, I could say, go give me the HMC version. As you can see, I've been dealing with many releases of this. Right now we're approaching ESP time, early ship program. And so right now I plugged that device in there. And now when I would boot up, I could actually change the boot from actually booting the installed code in manufacturing, and I could boot it to the install media and go through a regular update. Hopefully that makes sense. I will come back to the Petite Boot if people really want to see more of that, but we've got a lot of stuff going on this morning. So we just really want to give you an overview that this is coming. So this is what it would look like. And on your system, it would say boot HMC, and I'll show you that in a minute. But rather than show you just a bunch of screens, I wanted to very quickly show you a little bit of a live demo on that. So as far as configuring the IP address from Petite Boot, I would go to exit to the shell, and I would run, and I know it's going to be very hard to see this, but basically there's some IPMI utility commands that you would run in to set a static IP, and then you would go in and put your particular address, and then when you get done running those 5 commands, you would reset the management resource or the BMC, and then you could get at it just like I would. When it comes from the factory, you don't have to set that up, because the HMC, you can get to the local Counsel and you can boot it up just like your CR9. But I think what you'll find is that you will get more functionality out of this power-based HMC if you do set up the BMC IP address. If you do have a DHCP server, it can be assigned via DHCP as well. A couple other things I put in here is just to show you some of the commands that are done in manufacturing to set up the RAID configuration. You won't have to do this, but let's say, for example, if you had a catastrophic failure on it, and we know HMCs don't fail hardware-wise very often, these are some of the things that support would take you through, or an IBM CE would come on site and make sure that your RAID array is back up. Let's say you lost a disk drive, or you lost a planar board or something. So, and just a few more commands in here. And this is the one where in Petite Boot, you would get a couple of options where if I wanted to go through the installation, or I wanted to actually boot the code that was installed on the system. But very seldom are you ever going to have to go in here unless you're actually trying to do some updates or do any kind of a repair to the product. Very similar to what you would expect on on a CR9 or a CR8. The biggest difference is on a CR8, CR9 type device, there is an integrated CD-ROM. On these, there is not. We would allow you to use a USB, but we're going to find that most people are going to download the ISO when they need an upgrade or whatever, and they would use that in the case of a reload, etc. It's going to install the 8870 code. You know, you would either do a new install or an upgrade depending on why you were in here and you were updating it. It's going to look and feel the same. If I had saved my critical counsel data, I could restore that as well, or I just finished the installation if I was doing a new clean one. This is what the boot up would look like on the local console, or if I was coming in, your normal prompts as the configuration is starting up to ask you if you want to change the keyboard layout, obviously accept the licensing. The GUI will start up, then you go through the guided wizard, get the call home capability set up, and then you would be up and running. And that's basically what you would see. And here's my full console, and this is the console on through the BMC. And one of the things you'll see when I log in on this is going to act like I'm on the local console, so I can do everything that I can do on the local console, I can do on the remote console when I'm doing it through the BMC interface. And everything's going to look and feel the same. I would set it up just like anything else. I might do count, whatever, but notice I can open the restricted shell here, which I cannot do if I come in through a web GUI. That's going to be one of the highlights of this, is that we're going to give a lot more local control and remote control capabilities with this product. Let me go back to my charts here. Just about up on the time I had figured I'd go through, but obviously when I would go through the initial install, I would do all my setup. I would configure my IP. I would set my firewall ports as needed, finish up the network setting, continue through the guided setup wizard. And in my case, I used the password for root it didn't like, but it's basically the same steps you would do on a manual or on your consoles you were buying today based on x86 architecture. Obviously, I'd go in to allow remote capabilities based on your environment. And then the 870 is up and running, but you'll notice, and Alan will talk more about this in great detail, the enhanced GUI will be up and running, the 870, and there is no classic view in this environment. The last thing I want to just spend a couple minutes on, and obviously we can work with Joe to, after everything of this is fully GA'd, we can come back and do additional webinars on this. But basically, to install the HMC in a virtual environment, I should have put VHMC on Power VM environment there. Basically, you're going to create a LPAR on a power box just like you would today. The difference is I'm going to mount an ISO under Power VM, and here's the requirements. We want 8 gig of RAM minimum, 4 processors, and that's 4 virtual processors, 2 network interfaces, 160 gig of disk. Notice that there are some limitations for this. And one of the other things, limitation that I didn't mention on the first one, is this will not have RMC capabilities, meaning I can't do live partition mobility from one power box to another while it's running. Obviously, I could shut it off and move it, but that's just one of the restrictions we're going to put on this box. But here's, when we set up our environment, I went through, set up ATS Power VHMC1. Over on the right, I set up desired 1 processing unit, 2 shared. I really should have said 4 on the shared processors. Notice my virtual processors, I did allow this to go uncapped to 4. And you can decide how in your environment what you did. I decided I wanted 16 gig of memory versus 8. Notice I put maximum memory of 32, but in this environment, the desired and the max should be the same because you can't DLPAR in. So when you start it, you want to have it the resources that you want. over on the right-hand side of the screen, I set up a client vSCSI, and I let VIOS host me my 160 gig disk. I have got SEA adapter set up, so I just gave it one Ethernet adapter that's using two VIO servers to share that to give me some redundancy. So after you get the installation of the HMC, and it would be exactly like it is today when you install a physical HMC, because there is no graphical console, these commands right here you're going to have to run. Now I would suggest that for a customer that's going to do this, you could copy these and update it so you could just run them. I know Shook could talk to you other ways where you could deploy it out and make it a lot simpler. I'm just going through here's the way to do one virtual HMC. Obviously, if you were going to create multiple, you would probably use some scripting things that would make it a lot easier in a multiple virtual HMC environment. So once it would come up, I would use the virtual console that's in an AIX Linux environment. You're very much aware of how you would do that from a Power VM environment. And then I would run the LHMC commands, the -V, and then I would come back here and I would run, where's my commands? Run all the different commands here to configure it. And then if I wanted the NIST support for higher security, I would do that. But notice it's going to be headless. So then when I get everything set up and run, it would reboot with the network changes, and then I would come in through the graphical interface, and it would look and feel the same, just like any other HMC you have in your environment, except this is based on the 8870 code, and it is enhanced GUI only. So I know I went very fast, and so I'm going to stop here and see if there's any quick questions I can answer before I move on to Alan.
Yeah, so let's clarify one thing, Bob, because you mentioned LPM and the virtual HMC, and there was some confusion and several questions popped up.
Okay.
So you can't LPM the DLPAR that's running the virtual HMC, guys, but if you're using a virtual HMC, you can still LPM all the DLPARs that you normally would that HMC is managing. You just can't LPM the DLPAR that the virtual HMC is running in, right?
Yeah, and I should have spent a little bit more time right here, Joe, because the RMC code that you're accustomed to in an AIX install that would allow you in a completely virtualized environment to move it from system A to system B, those utilities are not supported and installed on the VHMC. And that's why we cannot, if you go to try to do a LPM and verify will it work, it won't, because it won't be able to talk to it. Now, if you shut the HMC down, the virtual HMC, then you could move it to another machine.
Okay. So with that, maybe I'll ask Ashok or Hari or Alan, if you guys have other questions. These guys have been answering a ton of questions in the background. It's been great to see that. But if you have other things that you think we need to bring up before we move on, let's give you that option.
Sure. Yeah, I think one of the themes I'm seeing in the questions is there seems to be some confusion about what VHMC does versus hardware appliance. So VHMC was introduced 2 years ago, and every HMC release you have one of two options. You can get HMC as a hardware appliance, or you can get HMC as this software appliance we informally call VHMC. Functionally, they are equivalent. So in terms of managing your power servers, whether it's service management, whether it's platform management, whether it's hardware management, it's the exact same functionality, whether hardware appliance or virtual appliance. When we introduce this power option, now you're going to have 4 different ways you're going to get this upcoming 8.7 release. You can get this 8.7 release as a hardware appliance on x86 or power. and you can get the 8.7 release as a virtual appliance on Power and x86. Again, functionality is exactly the same. So questions like if you want to install third-party software, just ask yourself, can you do this on x86 today? No. So you cannot do this on the Power either. Can you currently today, can you go and issue root level commands on x86? No. So you can't do that today. Can I open a 5250 console through the HMC today on x86? Yes. So you can do that on Power. So functionally, it's going to be the exact same as x86. So you're going to have any of these options in 870. We're not removing Power support or x86 support. We are introducing Power support.
Good. Glad to clear that up. Alan, are you on?
Yes, I am.
Okay, so interesting. I don't see any little icon there for you. So is this a handoff to you then, Alan?
I'm ready. Can you make me the presenter, and I'll see if this shows up?
And I just stopped sharing, Joe.
All right, I made Alan the presenter. So you just need to share your screen then, Alan.
Okay, are you able to?
Yep, I see it.
All right. And I always have to do this swap here. Okay, so you should see my screen in slideshow mode at this point.
Yes, sir.
Okay, well, thank you, Bob. That was a very good session. I think we got a lot of interest keyed up from our listeners. So there's still some pending questions that we may need to go back and review with them. As Joe mentioned, we have the extreme pleasure of having both Ashok and Hari on the phone behind me. Ashok being one of the lead architects, Hari, I believe, is the lead developer for the enhanced UI. And that's going to be the next phase of this presentation today. So with that said, Hari is actually the originator of most of these slides, so he has some deep background insight as to what he was intending to get across. I'm going to do my best to try to summarize his intentions. But these are what basic categories that we're going to walk through. What the Power VM simplifications are. That's one of the driving factors for this enhanced UI. It does generate a new logon page, which you've already probably seen. We still support the Classic up until the current GA level, which is version 8.860. Service Pack 1 is where we changed the login page. And at that level, we still have the Classic interface. But because, as Bob already mentioned, going into the next release, the 8.870 release, the Enhanced Plus is going to be the only supported interface. The Classic is being removed. And there's a number of reasons why that is. All the new functions going into the Enhanced Plus, so we want you to start looking at it, start using it, start giving us feedback. So we're going to walk through actually what the new enhanced user interface looks like, some of the navigation channels and considerations in using that, some of the basic functions like creating a new VIOS server or a new partition using templates, managing your environment, your partitions, your servers, virtual storage. So this is the list we're going to try to get through. There's been a lot of great topic matter being discussed in the chat boxes, so please continue to use those if you have questions. And I'm going to try to get through as much of this slide deck as I can. You probably have all seen this slide before, and I still like to emphasize that one of the main reasons we're going down this path is the incorporation of the REST API capabilities, giving us deeper integration with the Power VM functions, removing that jumping back and forth between DIO server, command line functions, and making all that underlyingly managed through the HMC itself. So we introduced the performance capacity metrics back at the very beginning of version 8 with the version 8.10. We've continued to enhance that specifically with the 860 code. We've added some capabilities for exporting some of those metrics. So the simplified virtualization management partition provisioning, we introduced the concept of templates some time ago. We've continued to improve on that. And the basic idea is to simplify the full deployment and virtualization management of these systems through the enhanced UI. we've added a number of features and functions that are only available in the enhanced UI. So again, more and more reason to start exploiting what it can do for you today with the current GA version that's out there. And I would strongly recommend getting to one of the most recent versions, the 850 or 860 versions of HMC, and I'll go on and explain that here in a moment. So this is another chart that Harg created. We introduced the enhanced UI way back in version 8.8.20. That was about almost 2 years ago. And that intent there was to start to get the idea out there and start to get some exposure to our clientele to use this interface. We had made that generally available. It was initially a tech preview, so officially not supported, but it became a generally available, fully supported interface as of the 8.8.30. And clients were mentioning to me, and I think development heard it very loud and clear, that the performance at this level was not what we were expecting it to be. So there's been a lot of emphasis in improving the performance of this enhanced UI interface. And we really saw significant gains starting with the 850 code level, and the 860 is better yet. So if you've touched it before and found it less than desirable from a performance or usability perspective, I strongly encourage you to go back and revisit it at one of these more recent versions of the HMC code, and I believe you will see both the usability and the performance as being significantly improved. We did some metrics just to kind of measure what that is. So you can see at the 840 level, just some of the capabilities that were built in and the time it would take to open up a page, such as the welcome page. We improved that by about a 80% improvement. Actions menu, again, almost 100% improvement in some of these functions. Launched the capture partition, again, about a 400% improvement. So that these are just metrics that kind of emphasize that, yes, we have focused on improving the performance with the enhanced UI over prior releases. And you can see that we really started to make some gain with the 850 code level. At the 860, we continued to focus on some of these requirements. So I'm not going to read each of these graphs for you, but you can see that there's been a lot of emphasis and a lot of improvement demonstrated in their hard work in the lab to make this perform much more to your expectations. So this is what the new logon panel looks like. You probably saw a couple flashes of it as Bob went through his slide deck. So he was showing you the code at the 8.870 level, which will be coming out here. Planned general availability is late in third quarter. But you'll notice on the sign-on panel, we've now enhanced that to show you right up front the level that you're at. The 8.860 SP1 PTF level is what we show here. And this logon panel still has the option for either the enhanced mode or the classic mode. And you'll notice that it defaults to the enhanced mode, and it will continue to default at the enhanced mode regardless of the last time you signed on. And that's because we're still really trying to get you to participate and give us the feedback that we're looking for on the performance and the usability of this interface. We also show you right up front some of the statistics and status about the systems that this HMC is managing, number of systems, partitions, and DIO servers that are being managed by this HMC. So you get some very upfront information as to the status of your environment. And to the right of that are these social media links. So there's a link into LinkedIn, DeveloperWorks, Twitter, and Apple. And these are hot links. So assuming your HMC has access to the internet, these will take you right out to these websites where you can get the latest information of what's being discussed, what's going on in DeveloperWorks, developers sharing thoughts and processes and plans that they're working on. And below that, I have it over on the right-hand side, but this would really show up underneath the sign-on panel, are some additional hot links. These are some of the hot topics that are being discussed, being developed. And again, if you want to find out more about that, these links will take you right into that set of information. So for comparison, I just grabbed the screenshot of the version 870 code. You'll notice that the classic is missing. Everything else looks pretty much the same, but that's the one change that you will notice with the 8870 code is classic interface has been removed. if you've struggled with finding things in the enhanced UI, and I've had customers say, I don't know where to start looking, I always try to point them back to at the very sign-on page, there's this launch panel about HMC interface options. And that'll bring up a table, a comparison chart of the classic interface compared to the enhanced UI, how to get to the new, through the enhanced UI to the same feature function capabilities that you're accustomed to. And it's broken down into partition management and server management. So it's very quick reference to help you find something. If you're struggling a little bit, just go into this, this interface panel, and it should help you locate what you're looking for. So understanding and navigating through the enhanced UI. Both Hari and I have created our own versions of this. I think Hari did a better job than I, so I grabbed his version. But he breaks this down very quickly. On the far left-hand side is the toolbar. Above that is the resource path. So it shows us where you are in the UI interface. One of the things I really like is this capability to pin. So if you're on a specific panel that you find yourself returning to frequently, you can take this option to pin that panel to the pins on the right-hand side, and that'll give you a quick jump off into that panel with a one point and click. The global gallery table, this is where you can view resources in either a graphical view or the gallery view as they call it, or a table view, which I refer to as a text view, and relational views where I can do relationships between DIO servers and the managed partitions that they support, showing both the VLAN or virtual networking definitions as well as virtual storage that they're providing for those client partitions. The quick filter, I learned something myself just the other day on this. I can, if I wanted to filter my view, let's say I'm looking at all partitions, I want to see all the partitions that are in a certain status state. I can drill down and show me all the partitions that are in a not activated state or in a open firmware state. So if I have hundreds of partitions and I just want to see the handful that are in a specific state, I can do that very quickly. The global search gives me the ability to search on things such as a partition name or a set of partition names. So if I have a naming convention that is specific to specific environments, by LPAR, I could do a very quick search on that and just view only those set of LPARs. So the fact is I can view all the LPARs being managed by a single HMC, whether it's across 1 or 2 servers or across 10 or 20 servers. So it can give me that one panel view of all of my partitions or all of my DIO servers. And then recently we added this task panel. So it now shows you where you've been in this session. It keeps track of what you've been doing, and you can kind of scan back through there and see if you've accomplished what your goals were for doing some of these issues. This is what the welcome panel looks like. So we've always had a welcome panel. It's a little bit different. So if you're setting up a brand new HMC, you may want to walk it through the guided setup wizard. And so that's how you would launch it here from the welcome panel. Connecting new systems or updating your HMCs. These are hot launches into the processes for accomplishing these activities. And below that, these are, again, hot links into how to configure templates or creating partitions from a template. So this is what that new panel looks like. If I'm specifically looking at a resource, I can highlight the resource, I can check mark it, I can then double click on that, and it'll bring up additional functions and features. So I have under resources panel, I can look at all systems, all partitions. I mentioned some of these already, all DIO servers. If I'm managing enterprise class systems and I'm using enterprise pools, this is a very quick launch off for that. Over on the far right-hand side, I had initially customers say, where do I find information about this new UI? We don't ship on the welcome panel, we don't have that link to integrated resources, setting up the HMC, managing HMC type of README information. But we do still provide it. It's over on that far right-hand side next to that question mark. If you hit that drop-down button, these are some of the launch paths you have. You can go right up to the Knowledge Center, or if you go into the About panel, it'll show you this is the current information about this HMC, what version release it's running, fixed level materials. It'll show you the serial number. So if you're working with support and they need that type of information for PESH access, this is how you get to that information, by simply hitting that drop down next to the question mark. So some of the things that you can look at is all systems. So that's one of the options. Over the toolbar side, I can select all systems. I can then narrow it down. I only want to look at one specific system. So I've selected this HV4-2. And if I hit the actions panel from there, I can see all the different actions I can jump right off into from that specific to that physical server. Or if I go into that view all actions, I can see all the possible functions I can do at the server level. And I can do the same thing at a partition level. So if I'm looking at a partition, I select that partition, I can view all actions and see the same type of capabilities that are done at a partition level. So this is a little bit more detail. So if I'm navigating underneath that specific specific server that I've selected, if I double click on it, it opens up this panel on the far left-hand side. If I expand some of those out, that's what I'm doing here in the center of the screen. Is under System Actions, you'll see that I can go into Operations. And if you're familiar with the capabilities under Operations, like shut down, restart, some of those types of capabilities, those be under Operations. I can manage my LEDs. I can set up additional connections at the server level. I'm in this update. Or if I wanted to update that physical server, if I needed to update the firmware with a new service pack, this is how you launch into that capability. From a partitions level, I can go into the properties there. One of the things customers first approach me on is, I don't see a tab for dynamic DLPAR anymore. And that was confusing to customers. So this is now referred to simply under partition properties. I can go in and look at it, the general settings, but more specifically, I can look at processor memory I/O, and that's where I could assign or remove specific I/O resources, add or remove memory processor resources. So it's a DLPAR operation. It's now just located under the Properties tab. Under Power VM, this is where we've really enhanced a lot of the virtualization capabilities and the interface into the I/O server, setting up new VIO servers, virtual networks. If I needed to add a new VLAN, for example, I could go into virtual networks for a given partition. Virtualized hardware, that would be things like our SRIOV adapters, if you're familiar with single root I/O virtualization. We also have all the other functions that you're familiar with, serviceability, COD operations. And what we do have that's very new to the UI only is some of this virtual diagramming, such as network diagram and storage diagrams.
So Alan, let's take a little break here for some overriding questions that have come in. Does that work out?
Absolutely, yes.
Yeah. So I should go ahead. I think there's some questions come in here that you wanted to address and bring up some stuff.
Yeah, if you don't mind, Alan, is it okay if I take over the presentation? I want to step back to a couple of earlier slides and answer some overriding questions that we're getting in the question and answer forum.
Absolutely. Do you want me to drive and back up to the slides you want to review?
Or if you can stop screen sharing, I think I can go ahead and take over. I have the charts as well, so I can step through it and kind of go back and then pick up where you left off as well, if you don't mind.
Okay.
So,
yeah,
okay. So Ashok, you're the presenter now, so you should be able to share your screen, and then we can just pop back and forth as you need. So if we need to go back to Alan, no problem there.
Yeah. Does everyone see my screen?
Yes.
Okay. So let me start back here on this slide because I see a lot of questions right here. People are saying this is confusing. Why did we do any of this? And Alan touched on this. But I want to re-emphasize here that what we did was we did not change the UI to introduce new colors, new fonts. This is not a new skin. That was not the intention. The intention behind the enhanced UI was to change how Power VM is managed. what we had observed, and this was done through user research, so please don't feel that this is something we came out with and we were very uninformed in our decision making. We had done a lot of user research. Perhaps many of you are familiar with our design studio and our design thinking process. We do encourage all of you to get involved in that process. So when we have topics like this where we need more user input on how to improve our products, your opinions can be heard. You can get in touch with me or any of us on this presentation to find out how. But we had done user research that found that Power VM management was not as simple as other virtualized solutions that were out there. Let's take as an example, a lot of people ask questions about, from the enhanced UI, how do I add a single adapter? How do I delete a single adapter? How do I change a slot ID? What we had done is we had found through user research, taken as example, assigning a disk to a partition. The old model that you would do in the classic UI is you would first create a server adapter on the VIOS, then you would create a client adapter on the partition, then you would create a mapping from the server adapter to that disk. And then you hope that you did everything correctly and you had the slot IDs correct so they pointed to each other. Then you would go to do this mapping, you would have to go out to the VIOS command line and do a make vdev command. This is not something you do on the HMC. So there were a lot of individual tasks that you had to do, and you had to make sure you did all that correctly. And it was a very error-prone process, so much so that we have teams like the lab-based services tool, that team that wrote a provisioning toolkit just to help automate this process. So we saw that this was not a good process. There were too many individual primitive tasks. There were context switches where you had to move between the HMC and the VIOS. As another example, do any of you use the hypervisor, in the sense that do you use the hypervisor command line? Do you use the hypervisor GUI? Answer should be no for all of you, because there is no such thing. You don't touch the hypervisor. The hypervisor is part of the platform. The HMC manages that hypervisor for you. Similarly, we want you to think of the VIOS as the same. Why do you have to keep switching back and forth between the VIOS and the HMC to do something as simple as putting a partition on a virtual network? Can't you do all of that from a single touch point? People always talk about a single pane of glass, that kind of cliche. So this was our intention in introducing the new UI, was to help make Power VM management more simple, make VIOS part of the platform, simplify a lot of the process. So that's why when you look at an example like templates on this slide, a template is after the idea that when you create partitions, you follow a pattern. When you have 200 partitions in your environment, you didn't sit and make sure everyone was absolutely unique. When you're creating a test partition, a QA partition, a production partition, a database partition, there's certain patterns that you follow. There's certain recipes or cookbooks, to use a chef terminology, that you follow. And so that was the point behind templates, is define a common pattern for a type of partition. And you have many of these patterns. So it's not that there's a single partition template or a single system template, but you define your patterns. Say, for example, you're bringing in a new S822 or a new 870. Maybe you already have these class of systems and you're just adding one more to increase your capacity. So you want to configure it the same as you had previously done before. Well, you can capture a template on an existing system, on an existing partition, change only those values you want to be different, and deploy it. So you don't have to set up a system from scratch and go through the entire set of variables and tunables that you had to do. Similarly, the one-touch management, where you don't need to keep going to the VIOS command line. Sure, depending upon your storage, if you're using EMC Viper or using Hitachi or whatever, there's going to be some storage driver work you may need to do. But by and large, virtualization management, there should be no reason for you to go out and use the VIOS. And then the REST API Alan mentioned. A lot of these primitive actions, yes, you can do on the command line. But if I wanted the example I gave you, where I want to assign a disk to a partition, you can either write a script that does 5, 8 different commands, or you can use a single REST API that does it as an atomic operation. And this is the same REST API that not only the enhanced GUI uses, but other products as well. The Cloud Management Console that you may have heard about that was released recently in May, Power VC, the MyHMC mobile app. So we use that same REST API because it provides this higher level operation paradigm that I talked about. Now on this next slide, this is something that has been out for 2 years now. So the question we get is sometimes is, why are you withdrawing the classic UI? What am I supposed to do? Well, understand that this is not some recent thing where we just introduced a new UI and at the same time cut off the old one. This has been 2 years in the making. Now, that being said, we do admit that earlier on in the releases, the 8.3 and the 8.4 release, this GUI was not very usable. And we had a lot of work that we needed to do to make it so. So Alan mentioned the performance improvements. This is not saying that it's fast. This is saying that it's faster in recent releases, but more work is needed. We do a lot of extensive testing in our labs, but understand that our environments are much more primitive than yours. We don't run production workloads. We don't have the same understanding of real world environments that you do. So what we do is we try and approximate based on feedback we get what those environments are like, and we try and find performance problems. Now, for example, an IBMI customer might have 100 plus NPIV LUNs assigned to a single partition, not something we ever considered here. So they may see a performance problem with that, and we go and we address it. So what the point here is we are working on performance, but we're not saying that we figured out all the problems. There may be some other performance problems that you hit, and we want you to share that feedback with us. Now, when we say the classic UI is being withdrawn, that means this upcoming 8.7 release that Bob talked about is going to be enhanced UI only. Now, the 8.6 release thereby becomes the last release that supports that classic login. That doesn't mean that that 8.6 release no longer is supported. It's still going to have a full life cycle. So that means the 8.6 release, which goes end of support in November of next year, 2018, you have until then to still make the transition. So what we tell people who are still taken aback by this news that 8.7 will be enhanced only, we tell them if you haven't started using enhanced UI, please start doing so now. If you're unsure or you're not happy using it in a production environment, don't. Keep the 8.6 release in your production environment. Use the classic UI. At the same time, deploy this 8.7 release, or if you have the 8.6 release, use the enhanced UI in a test QA environment. Get comfortable with it. Give us feedback what's working and what's not. As I told you, a lot of this was based on user research, but everyone is different. Everyone has different needs. Now, if your feedback is, I need you to bring back everything in the classic UI, we need to talk about that more and find out why you disagree that this is a simpler model than what you had with the classic UI. But we want the feedback to be constructive. Tell us exactly what's not working. What doesn't help us is if you say the UI is slow, the UI is unusable. Well, we have a lot of users that disagree. If you go out in public media like our Power VM LinkedIn forum, you'll see some spirited debate where we have people arguing this back and forth. Some people it works just fine, others it may not. We need to know the specific things that are not working with you. How do you give us this feedback? We have these forums that we talked about, like Power VM, Developer Works, HMC Developer Works. On HMC Developer Works, just Google that and you'll find the link for it. Tell us your feedback there. Again, be explicit. If you're having issues, you don't know where a certain task is or how to do a certain operation. If you do feel there are performance issues, whatever the case may be, report it there. Our development team actively monitors these forums. So this is your chance to give us direct feedback and engage our development team one-on-one. If it is something we need to see logs for, we can advise you that a PMR is necessary, but we need to get that feedback to understand what's working, what's not. The other questions I saw in the question and answer forum was on this login page saying, why did you do any of this? I don't need any social media. Again, this is not just putting a general link out to Facebook or Twitter. These are very specific links. If any of you have heard my roadmap presentations at forums like TechU or LUG or TCC or elsewhere, you realize that HMC is only part of the systems management story. We have many other products that serve other purposes, such as Power VC and Novalink. I mentioned we have a mobile app called MyHMC that uses our REST API, the Cloud Management Console. What all these links are links out to those products. So when you click on the LinkedIn icon, you're not just going out to LinkedIn in your own homepage. You're going out to that Power VM LinkedIn page where I mentioned we have a lot of discussion around our products, Q&A, we post new blogs. So the idea here is not social media just because everyone else does it, but to point you to information we're putting out there. We do blogs every single week, whether it's enhanced UI, we put out blogs on how to use templates, virtual networks, virtual storage. So all these information is out there, but a lot of you may not realize this. So that's one of the reasons we put all this social media on the login page, is to put in right in front of you, what are we talking about? Give you as much information as possible to help you understand what's going on right now in the world of Power and Power VM. Now this page right here, Alan talked about DLPAR and where did it go. On the login page, click on this link. If you are new to the enhanced UI or used it and are struggling with it, click on this link. Just read this information right here. This is a good starting point to understand this new model and find out where did the operations you have before go. So if you, for example, the DLPAR operation, we don't want you to think of DLPAR as a specific task. What are you trying to do? You're just trying to modify a partition. Do we have to call it a separate task whether the partition is up or running or not? All you want to do is modify the partition. You don't need to worry if it's running or not. Let us worry about that. You just manage the properties of the partition. If it's running, we use RMC. If it's not running, we modify the current partition configuration. So to understand that shift, that's where this comes in right here. Now, jumping onto these slides that Alan talked about, giving you different views on how to view the different endpoints you have, the default is this gallery view. Now, if you find this cumbersome, you have a lot of systems. Well, Alan mentioned you have options to search, you have options to filter. When you have a specific view, you can pin it using this pin icon. So there are ways to find the information you want quickly. But if for whatever reason graphical views are not your thing and you really prefer tables, you have options to do so. You have options to get to a table view. You have options to get to a relational view. So there are different ways to go and view this information. The other thing is, we do have a getting started guide. So Alan showed when you click on this help icon, you have different information right here. README. This is something that a lot of you, and we jokingly sometimes call it a not README, because a lot of you don't want to read documentation. And we understand that. We're all very busy. We don't have time to sit and read pages and pages of documentation. But a lot of the questions, for example, I'm unable to select boot mode when I want to do a profile-based activation from the enhanced UI. A lot of issues we know about, a lot of issues we try and fix, whether in a service pack or the next release. The way you stay on top of it is by reading the README. So unfortunately, we wish there was a better shortcut. We do write blogs for new releases on enhancements we make in the enhanced UI. But if you want to know what's fixed or what's a known issue, we highly recommend you start with the README and give it a skim. Now you see that getting started topic there, and that's going to take you here. So some of these simple questions about, for example, how do I update firmware? You don't know where that is. So you can read about that here, and you can see these links to help you get started with all that. So the rest of the presentation, what we wanted to do was just walk you through some of these different use cases and some of the new constructs that are in this user model. So the initial thing you do when you get a new system is you want to set it up. And with setup, we have this concept called templates I mentioned earlier, which is our way of having a pattern to define your system or your partition. Now, there's two basic pieces to a template. You manage a template, which is when you create it, you copy it, you edit it, and then you deploy a template. That's where you actually apply it to your system. Now, what you can edit in a template depends on which of those two routes you're going. When you're managing a template, that is, you're editing it, you're copying it, deleting it, you can change anything you want in a template. It's completely open to you. Now, we actually ship the HMC with a couple of what we call canned or default templates. And you see this here in the template library, and the path is specified here. You see that there's a couple of common configurations that we have here. Again, this was based on our user research, but all of you are different. All of you have different needs. So you may have different configurations as well. So you can always copy one of these default ones and edit it and customize it to your specific environment. So after you go and you edit this, and again, these charts are meant to give you an overview of some of these new concepts. You can find the downloads for these presentations in the virtual user group community. So we're not going to go through every single option on these charts. We just want to give you an impression of the overall concept. But when I create a system template, I can edit all the same values that I normally would at a system level. If I want to add other VIOSs, I mentioned, for example, we have some CAN templates that have dual VIOS. We have a CAN template that has 4 VIOSs. I don't know, maybe you want 3 for whatever reason. You can absolutely go and do something like that. And so you're going to go and then you're going to go and edit all of it, and then you want to go and deploy it. In this screen, you see it says deploy Power VM. Now, when you deploy a system template, again, a system template is your description of what the virtualized configuration of your server looks like. So when you deploy this, it's going to wipe out your system completely. This is something you would do on a new server or a server you want to rebuild from scratch. You want to blast the existing configuration and start all over. Very dangerous operation because you're deleting everything. So that's why we have this reset button here. So when you deploy a system template, you have to click on that reset button, and that's basically your way of acknowledging you know what you're doing. You're going to wipe out your system configuration. You accept that responsibility. So it's a confirmation more than anything else when you deploy a system template. Now on this next page, you see an example where you can go and change the VIOS name. This was the point I made where I said, when you manage a template in the template library, that's where you edit it. That's where you change all the properties. But when you deploy it at that time, there's only a few things we allow you to change because our model here is it's a pattern. When I deploy a pattern, I want to keep as many things as possible the same. Now, of course, a VIOS name is going to be specific to that server it's on. Maybe I use the server name in there. Maybe I use it to describe what workloads are going on that server. But we understand VIOS name is something that you're going to want to change. But if I'm replicating a VIOS configuration, processors and memory are something that are going to be fixed. That's, again, something I want to replicate. So name is the only thing you can change in this panel of the deployment process. Physical I/O, of course, is something that you may want to change as well because you won't have the exact same adapters shared by all your servers. Of course not. So that's something that we do allow you to change as well. So after you go and you deploy a system template, it'll go and configure the VIOSs. It'll go and assign that physical I/O you want to the VIOSs. Your next step is to actually install the VIOS. So it gives you options to do a NIM-based installation using the HMC as a NIM server. So this shows you the different options that you can specify when you're deploying a VIOS. Now, there's not the only way that you can deploy a VIOS. So there's other ways as well, and this segues into the next topic, which is a partition template. So system template helps you create your virtualization at a server level. I have a brand new server or a server I want to recreate. So I'm going to go and create my VIOSs and define virtual networks. And we'll talk about what a virtual network is in a little bit. But afterwards, I just want to create a partition. In the old HMC, you would bring up the wizard and you would step through the wizard every single time you wanted to activate a partition or create a partition. Our paradigm here is, again, pattern-based templates. Why do you need to go through a wizard for every single partition you want to create? If I want to create a dozen partitions, is every partition going to be so different that I need to change every single value, memory, CPU, I/O, boot settings? Do you really need to change every single one of those settings for every 10 partitions that I create? Or are there certain common attributes you want? Again, maybe I'm using all these partitions for a test environment for some of my testers. So there's a specific configuration I want to deploy for all of them to be consistent. So you define that partition template. Now, just like system templates, we do ship canned or starter templates that are some common configurations we've observed in our user research. And you can always edit, copy them and create your own based off of them. Now, Once you create a template, we actually do validation. I mentioned earlier that let's say I already have a system that I want to replicate. I bring in a new 870. I want to copy a configuration from an existing 870. So I can do a capture template on the old system, and then I can deploy that captured template on my new system. But there may be certain things that are changed on my new system. Again, I may need to change I/O. Maybe the Power VM, there's some difference there. I had enabled Power VM Enterprise, or I had entered in some virtualization enablement code on the old system. I didn't do it on my new system. So we do need to validate and make sure when you deploy that every setting that's in that template is applicable to the system you're deploying it on. So we do a validation as well. And then once you deploy it, if there are any failures at that point, we stop the deployment and we ask you to go resolve the issues that are in the error messages, and then you would resume that deployment. So how do I go and I create a partition? There's a couple of different ways to go. And again, you create a template. So what you would do is here, I'm in the all partitions view. So you have a button in the upper right-hand corner that says create partition. You have a task at the system level that you can go to do there as well. So there's two different menu options there as well. When I create a partition, we introduced something new in 8.6. We wanted to try and make this process as quick as possible. Maybe there's a use case here. This is another thing we'd like your feedback on. The idea here is you basically go and carve off some space for a partition. So you're not going and booting up and deploying a partition right away, but we introduced this quick create option in the 8.6 release, where basically I want to type in as minimal information as possible just so I can say I created that partition. Later on, I'll come in and edit the storage and the network, but for now, I just want to rapidly create a bunch of partitions, and I don't want to type in a bunch of information. So that was the idea behind this quick partition creation that was introduced in 8.6. Now you can always launch back into the main template flow as well, but you see that highlighted option there, create using templates. But if you don't want to, just create this partition. You see the defaults there, and then you can later on revisit this. Now I showed you how to do this from a partitions view. I also mentioned we have this concept of a templates library. So all the templates you create, system and partition templates, go into this library, and here I show you how to navigate to that. And when I launch that, I get 3 different tabs right here. So I can manage system, partition, or even my VIOS images that I use when I deploy a VIOS. Now, when I go to create the partition, we see these different settings here. This is pretty straightforward, nothing really different here from our old setup wizard when I'm creating a template. Virtual network, we will talk about shortly, and I'll explain what that is. And all the same options here, virtual storage we'll also discuss. So you go through the flow. Now, this is something that's a little bit new or will be new to some of those. Activate and apply. In the old model, when you create a partition, it creates a profile with it. A lot of people get confused later on because there is an option to keep that activated profile in sync with the partition. What that means, and again, I'm talking about the old model, is when you go and you do any DLPAR, for example, I add a CPU or I add a virtual adapter to my partition, if you don't have that sync enabled, your profile won't be updated. So your partition configuration is changing, but your profile remains unchanged. So the next time you come around and reactivate the partition, you lost all your DLPAR changes, and it was a constant source of frustration for many users. We introduced the sync concept to allow you to keep that activated profile in sync with any DLPARs, but a lot of people didn't know about this option, didn't know when to use it, so they didn't have that option enabled. And same problem, I did a DLPAR, it's not in my profile. Well, with this new model, with templates, anytime you deploy a template, we automatically enable that sync, so you don't have to worry about it. In addition, we also introduced this concept of activate and apply. Activation, you know what that is. I'm activating a profile. No change from the old classic model. Apply is concerning this concept of a current configuration. We find profiles very cumbersome, and those of you who've struggled with keeping it in sync with DLPARs might agree as well. Typically, we see a lot of customers don't create 10 profiles for a partition. They may have 2 or 3 profiles. And when you go and you look at other virtualization solutions that are out there from competitors, they don't really have a profile concept. Again, you're just modifying a partition directly. So we wanted to not get rid of profiles, but introduce an alternate way to look at this. You can still always do everything around profiles if you're comfortable with that. But for those of you who agree that profiles are unnecessarily burdensome, you can avoid them altogether. When you create a partition from a template, you can tell it to create the partition and apply the configuration. What that means is after creating the partition, all the settings that are in the template get applied as if you're activating a profile. So you no longer have to mess with profiles. All you do is you create, you apply, and then you boot the partition. There was no profile involved in this flow at all. So this whole concept of current configuration, this whole concept of applying a configuration is meant so that you can avoid some of the hassles you had with profiles. So now when I go to activate a partition, you'll get this view right here where you can either activate from a current configuration, which we just mentioned, or the old profile-based way. Now, one thing I will mention is a lot of you have already, perhaps are using enhanced UI, noticed that we do have a bug in this panel, and that is when I choose profile-based activation, these overrides here for key lock boot mode are not enabled. That is a bug that we will be fixing in the 8.6 Service Pack 2 that's coming out in July, and we will be fixing that in the 8.7 release as well. So that is a known bug that in this panel. You see key lock and boot mode are disabled, and they will be when you're activating current configuration, but they should be enabled when you're using a profile. Now, we talked about the system. We talked about the partition. What about the VIOS itself? We looked at how to deploy a VIOS in the context of a system template, but I don't want to deal with templates right now. My system is already up and running. I want to add another VIOS or perhaps another pair of VIOSs. Absolutely, you can do that. If you didn't create the VIOS using system template, we do have a wizard for which you can create a VIOS, and that's simple. In the virtual IO servers view, where you look at all the VIOSs on a single server, we have a button, Create VIOS. When you click on that button, this is almost the exact same setup wizard that all of you should be familiar with on that old model. One of the things that confuses users a little bit is this slider. When you're changing this slider, sliding it up and down, this is actually changing the allocated amount. So this slider is used to indicate what the allocated value would be. Maximum and minimum are going to be calculated by us using some algorithm that we have. So you're controlling allocated, we calculate a maximum minimum based on that. Now you may think our algorithm is no good or you don't like the values we're choosing, and that's why these are text fields. So you can always go into maximum, allocated, and minimum and manually change the values there if you don't want our slider to do any of the work for you. So the same flow, and that's it. You go and you deploy it. You can either, again, apply the configuration, which just creates the VIOS and applies all the settings, so to define the partition, or if you have a VIOS image that you want to boot off of and do a NIM install from the HMC itself, you can choose that option there as well. Now, after you've gone and created your system, you created your partitions, the next thing you're going to do is change it. And this is where we brought up that whole thing about DLPAR and how there's a different model now. So there's different facets of managing a partition depending upon what it is you want to modify. So if we look right here, I can modify general properties, processors, memory, rather than a single panel that you go and modify all properties in. We broke it out by property type. If you want to look at what the partition currently looks like, rather than going into that view, you just want a quick overview of it, you can do so by hovering over this information icon that's in the gallery view. And it shows you some information here. Now, one thing I want to point out why we have this screenshot here is this RMC connection. This is very important in the enhanced UI. Now, just as I mentioned that the VIOS, we treat it as part of the platform. It is not a separate thing that you should be switching to back and forth from the HMC. In order to communicate with the VIOS, though, we need RMC. So I mentioned this because this is very crucial to the way the enhanced model works, and it's also a distinction between the classic UI. A lot of times people say, there was a certain operation I did in the classic UI and it worked. Why didn't it work in enhanced UI? And that's because we have a much greater dependency on RMC. We do a lot more interactions with the VIOS than we do in the classic UI. Again, classic UI, we expect you to go out to the VIOS for a lot of operations. In the enhanced UI, we're trying to encapsulate all that and do a lot of the VIOS operations for you. So RMC is absolutely important. Anytime you have issues with RMC, we have a command called diag RMC. That's all one word, D-I-A-G RMC. You can Google it, look at the man page. It's a very helpful tool to help you debug any issues where you don't see it active. Now, when I manage general properties, this is not too much different here. I can click on advanced to get to these advanced properties. This is very similar to what we used to have to classic. You see right here, save configuration changes to profile on the left-hand bottom side. This is that sync option I talked about that's off by default in the classic model, enabled by default in the enhanced model when using partition templates. Processor, same thing that when I did the template, I can go and change processor allocations, I can change memory allocations, and I can change physical I/O. Now let's talk about virtual networks. So this is something that's going to take a little bit of getting adjusted to for a lot of you, because again, what we're doing is we're encapsulating a lot of the primitives that are in creating virtual networks and putting a partition on that network. We want to get away from this model where everything is adapter based and I have to go to the VIOS command line and create an SCA and then create the mapping from trunk adapter to SCA. We want to automate all of this. So in order to do that, we have to introduce some higher level constructs that encapsulate these primitive operations. So here is a table, and I talked earlier about social media. All of this is in a blog that has much more detail. All I did was I lazily copied and pasted all of it. So again, Power VM Developer Works, Power VM LinkedIn. Google that, go to it, follow it. All this information will be there. So this table here is from the blog that basically compares and contrasts what you were used to in the old classic model versus what you deal with now. So a virtual switch is unchanged. What a virtual network is, when you use that term, is it's a combination of a VLAN and a vSwitch. A VLAN goes on a vSwitch, so we didn't see any reason to keep those two distinct. When you put a partition on a network, you're putting it on a specific switch and a VLAN on that switch. A network bridge is what is same as an SCA, except now we allow you the capability to deploy these in pairs. Typically either for failover or load balancing. This is what you're probably doing anyway in the classic model. Now you can do that through the HMC using the concept of a network bridge and load groups. So this table helps you compare and contrast that. So I go and I can view the properties. I can go and add a new virtual network. When I go and add a new virtual network, it's 2 steps to get a partition on the virtual network. First, I have to actually define that virtual network. If I don't have a virtual network, how do I put a partition on a virtual network? So you have to first define this at the system level. Then you can put a partition on that virtual network. So it's a little bit different, whereas in the old model, I would define a virtual Ethernet adapter on a partition. Then I would have to go out to the VIOS and define a trunk adapter. Then I would have to go to the VIOS and create the SCA. Here, what we say is create the network, put the partition on the network. Again, this is more going after where I create my infrastructure from ground up, and rather than having a bunch of different parts that I have to string together in different manners or different orders and maybe more error prone. So create the virtual network, put the partition on the virtual network. When I create a virtual network, it can either be bridged, which means the traffic will go out to my wide area network, or it's just an internal network. The traffic is only between partitions on that power host. When I bridge it, that is, I'm using a shared SCA pair. I can also do a load sharing, or I can do failover. When I create this failover group, I can also specify IP addresses for that SCA on the VIOSs, and that also gets set up as well. Now, a lot of you are very fixated on adapters, and we understand that. It's just something that you're used to doing in the classic model. So even though we're trying to tell you that you don't need to worry about things at that granular level, let HMC automate all of this, some of you still have very strict policies that it's going to be tough for you to move away from immediately. So with this understanding, we do allow you to actually go in and look at adapters. We prefer that you slowly move away from this model, but if you need to, for example, here we have an option where you can go to an adapter view. So in there, you can go and you can change slot numbers, and we'll see the same thing for storage, virtual storage as well. So once I go and I modify the virtual network, I can add a partition to it. So let's talk about storage. That's a little bit simpler because that's not introducing too many new concepts. Here we have SCSI, NPIV or virtual fiber channel, and virtual optical. So to add a device, again, you don't need to go and create adapters and all that. All you do is you choose that device. You choose, in this case, we show you physical volumes that the VIOS sees. So you choose that physical volume and you assign it to the partition. If you want to change the virtual target device name, you can do that if you have specific naming conventions. And we also have the edit connection option. So if you want to do the multiplexing where I have one server adapter, allow connections from multiple client adapters, you can do that using the edit connection. NPIV, if you want to use your own WWPNs and not the ones that are generated by Power VM, by all means, you can do that as well. Now, once I've gone and configured everything, so we looked at configuring a system, we looked at configuring a partition, we looked at modifying a partition. I want to see how all this looks. And so we introduced the concept of topology diagrams. Before, again, in the old method, I would have to match up slot numbers and I would have to construct a lot of this end-to-end view myself. Some of you have used perhaps Visio tools. Some of you, I know a lot of you have a lot of spreadsheets that are very detailed but very cumbersome to go through. So we introduced these topology diagrams. And that's not to say that this simplifies things in the sense that a lot of you have very complicated topologies. So it still may not be very easy to view in a single window. So you can always export it and view it later on. So we look at virtual networking. Here we show how a partition is connected out to the NIC on the VIOS, the actual physical network. We show the connection path. You can click on any of these objects. You can click on an adapter. You can click on a partition, and it'll highlight the path that shows how it's connected out. When we go and look at storage, that's when things get a lot more complicated. And you can see this kind of looks like a map of the London Underground. And so here, rather than show a bunch of links that you can't follow, we ask that you first select what you want to view. So in this case, I clicked on this partition right here, and I want to see how storage is mapped to this partition. So I have here fiber channel adapters. I have a vhost. All that gets highlighted when I click on that partition. And here it is at a system level, and I told you this is a partition level, but I told you as it gets more complicated at a system level, it becomes a little tougher to follow. So that's why you can always click on the individual entities to highlight the paths, or you can always export it. Now, another thing we get by virtue of this new model where we treat VIOS as part of the platform is we can get a lot more data out of the VIOS than through just the hypervisor. Now, all these features I'm showing you are available in the enhanced UI since the 8.3 release. So unless otherwise noted, like the quick partition create, all this has been there. So this is not anything new that I'm introducing here. So performance and capacity monitor, now we used to have this old LPAR utilization, a bunch of metrics we could collect from the hypervisor. But now that we're bundling, so to speak, the VIOS as part of the platform, we can get a lot more statistics from it. So that's what the performance and capacity monitor does. Is it gathers utilization metrics from the hypervisor, the VIOS. So now in addition to memory and CPU, we have a lot of data on storage. We have data on virtual networks. So a lot of different ways to view this data. We show raw metrics, processed metrics, aggregated metrics. All of this, remember, enhanced UI is built on REST API. So if you don't want to use the UI, you have your own automated tools, for example. You want to get monthly reports on your CPU utilization, for example, you can absolutely do that. You can export data from PCM. You can use our REST API. So there's a lot of different options to do this. And if you want more information on exporting API, a blog is there. Just go to Power VM LinkedIn and look for it, or Power VM Developer Works. So since we're almost out of time, I'm going to have to go through this a little quickly. What I'd like to mention, though, on PCM is it's a way to view a lot of these metrics, but it's not meant to be a troubleshooting tool. It is not going to find bottlenecks for you. It's a way for you to understand your overall utilization and your efficiency. Have you over-allocated resource? Have you under-allocated resource? Are you seeing partitions or virtual networks that are misbehaving? You're seeing peaks and trends. Maybe then that's something you do need to go look into, but it's not meant to be a troubleshooting aid that's going to tell you exactly what process to look at, what thread to look at, how to tune your partition, capacity planning. It's not meant to be that so much as it is just to find out how your utilization is looking. So we see a couple of different views right here. Now, one of the comments we frequently get is, how come this is a very partial effort you guys have done? Okay, you've introduced this new model, but I still get some classic UI panels. The point I hope you understood is we were trying to improve how Power VM management is consumed. So console and service management is not Power VM. When you configure the date and time on the HMC, that is not managing the Power VM hypervisor or the Power VM virtualization environment. When you do a call home of the platform, that is not Power VM. That has nothing to do with VMs and creating them. That is a fru or a fan had some sort of error in it. So that is not going to be in the enhanced UI. So that's what the distinction I want to make is I show here different ways to navigate to these tasks, but none of these tasks you see here have anything to do with Power VM management. So we did not port any of these panels over to this new look and feel. Again, we weren't after a new look and feel. We were after a more improved way to do Power VM management. So that's why it looks a little bit disjoint, I agree, but that is the reason behind it. Now, I mentioned that you all need to go and check out our blogs. So this is a chart from a recent TechU session that we had put together, so you can ignore the last bullet there. But there are a lot of links right here. And what you can do is you can Google, all of these will be on our Power VM LinkedIn page. So if you just Google Power VM LinkedIn, you'll see all these links there. So you can go to any of them. You can read in a lot more detail. Another thing I would advise you is on YouTube. We have a channel called Power VM as well. We put videos up on there a few years ago when version 8 HMC first came out on how to access PCM, how to use it. We're going to be putting up blogs in the near future, or videos rather, on how to use the enhanced UI. So that's another forum I would encourage you to use as well. And again, on that login page, that's what it links out to. When you see a YouTube link, it's not going out to YouTube so you can watch trailers for upcoming movies. It's to our Power VM channel so you can see the videos we're putting out about our features and our products. And finally, again, one last plug for this whole social media forum. This is where any of the feedback you have on this presentation, any questions we weren't able to answer for you in this, as you start to use this enhanced UI, any further questions you have on it that you would like to ask our development team, we have some of them on the call today. They always monitor the forums. Please do reach out to us. Please do let us know what's working and what's not working for you. Thanks.
Okay, so we are just out of time here. So let me do a couple of things. I know we're going to run a minute over here, but let me do a couple of things. First of all, thank you, everybody. And we've got a bunch of questions, we didn't get to as well. So what we're going to do is I'm going to save all the questions off into a questions log. We'll do our best to answer ones that we didn't get to, and then I will post the questions log up onto the wiki. So the wiki link is in all the emails that I've sent out, your invitations, reminders, and all that. So you'll be able to get a link to the wiki. I've actually got two different links to the same place right now. I'm moving over to a different one that gives me better stats on it. So anyway, we'll put the questions log out there. The presentation materials are already out there. I'll be putting a replay to the recording for this session out there as well, either today or tomorrow, as soon as I can get it downloaded and everything. So just want you all to know about that. You know, there's a lot of questions out there, and still a lot of questions about this. So we'll see how this goes. Feel free to write some comments. In fact, I encourage you to write some comments when you end the webinar. Let us know if you want a follow-up session, because maybe we'll do that given the questions and the fact that we ran out of time here. We could do a follow-up session just on the enhanced GUI and follow up on that as well. So please enter some comments there and let us know what you'd like to see in regard to any kind of a follow-up session. So with that, you know, we are out of time, so I think I'll go ahead and end it here. I want to thank you, Alan and Bob and Ashok, for the great presentation. Just so much information, lots of change, and sometimes that's hard for people to get used to. But I think, like you said, all for the best. I want to thank Hari also for in the background. He was busy answering questions as well as everybody else that wasn't talking at the time. So thanks, guys, for doing that. I will capture the log and I will post it. So with that, everyone, just thanks a lot, and have a great summer. I'll see you all next month.